So I'm in Delhi, and here's the Red Fort. And this is the best place to answer the question about who's responsible for climate change. Actually, when I ask that question to people in schools, or anywhere in the world, you always get the same answer. You get this sort of cloud, of this bubble, speech bubble from the audience, and everybody says it's either China, it's the USA, or it's India. Those are like the three top 10, this kind of Champions League of emitters. And that's just not the case. Well, there's, as you see in chapter 7 in the Climate Academy textbook, that's the data tells a very different story. So when we're asking questions about who is responsible, it's important to have the science right and the data right, because India here, in fact, is one of the lowest emitters in the world on a per capita basis. You can see how many people are just here in Red Fort. So India, a massive population like China, and when you divide those carbon budgets per person, which I think is only fair, you know, I don't have more of a right to breathe than these people around me. I think if you don't accept that, then you're either a racist or you're not just applying common sense to how we should go about solving this crisis. But before we're getting into those details about exactly which nations are responsible in Chapter 7, there's some groundwork that needs to happen first about who is responsible. And the shortest answer to that question is actually that it's humans. And we call this anthropogenic climate change. So anthropos from the Greek for man, for people. If you don't accept that climate change is caused by humans, if you don't accept that it's anthropogenic, then you're either brain dead, you're a zombie, or you are scientifically illiterate, or perhaps you're just deeply compromised by some kind of political, tribal thinking, which has shut your brain down in certain lobes. Because the science is absolutely emphatic, sigma 5 certainty emphatic. That's like 1 in 35 million sure that we are doing it. And that is to distinguish anthropogenic climate change from natural climate change. And natural climate change has, of course, been happening. That's if you look in the graphs of CO2 using ice core data and so on. There's other ways of getting the data, but that's the main one. Well, you can see that there have actually been cycles in the Earth's climate change systems, and these have gone on kind of natural loops, and these loops last for 100,000 years, 41,000 years, 26,000 years. And the Serbian geophysicist and astronomer Milan Milankovic, he understood remarkably in the 1930s, in an age before IBMs and computing powers, just with a brain and a pencil. And in fact, he did quite a bit of his work in prison because he was working during wartime. He worked out that these cycles have had an impact on the way in which, on the climate of the Earth. So just for one detail, for example, on the 100,000-year cycle, the Earth's orbit around the sun shifts from being like a rugby shape to being like a football shape. And that irregularity in our proximity to the sun, and there's also a wobble on the on the tilt and the axial thing. But essentially, we understand very well that in the past that the Earth has gone under great periods of climate change. But this is different. Look at the graph, and look at the graph. Most graphs go back 800,000 years. You can actually go back 4 million years in terms of climate change, and the patterns are the same. The CO2 level doesn't shift outside of a stable equilibrium of between 180 and 300 parts per million, that very deeply entrenched equilibrium. And what's happened since the Industrial Revolution, and especially since 1950, and especially in the last 10 years, because we keep accelerating, that we've shunted the CO2 level far outside of that natural cycle, those natural cycles. And we're on the edge now of pushing it into a territory where we just really don't know what will happen, other than the fact that CO2 concentrations are going to really rocket if we go into tipping points, because then nature takes over and you get collapses of whole ecosystems. And you can actually see that in the long-term graphs, that when you see this kind of oscillation between 180 and 300 parts per million, what you can notice in that graph is that the collapses happen very fast, and the rebuilding of those ecosystems happen much more in a kind of more punctuated or in a slower way. So this, to conclude, this is anthropogenic climate change. We humans, we're doing it. We Europeans are doing it more than these Indians, and so on. So these are like the basic ground rules. But I want to go further than just talking about humans, and also just in terms of national responsibilities. I want to focus here at Red Fort. I've chosen this location because, as I'm sure you're aware, India was under British colonial rule. And under that colonial rule, if we just dig a little bit deeper to the next deeper level of the matrix, if you like, we find something else. We find capitalism. And capitalism is actually, in some ways, a better answer as to why climate change is happening.